Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you are passionate about.
My name is Patricia Valoy. I have a civil engineering degree and was an engineering project manager for 10 years. Currently, I freelance by doing writing and speaking engagements about women and people of color in STEMs. I travel to universities and organizations and talk to their students and their members about what it feels like to be a woman in STEM, but also how to succeed and thrive in the industry when you're a minority and sometimes all the odds are against you. Truly, I am very passionate about feminism. Hardcore. It informs all my decisions, my career and my personal life and my activism. So I would say that in a nutshell, that's like what I would be the most passionate about.
So, in your activism, which plays into feminist women in STEM fields, what do you find the most rewarding?
The most rewarding part for me is when at the end of a talk, I have like a student that maybe didn't say anything or maybe seemed shy. And then it's usually a female student, but not always, but it's pretty much always a person of color. They will come up to me and they would say like, I was thinking about quitting because I just didn't feel like I belong, and you made me feel like maybe I can do this. Or they kind of see a little of themselves in me, which is kind of what I've always tried to do. I don't like to be this role model that seems like, wow, she did everything perfectly, because I didn't. I want to show people that like I had a lot of odds against me. It wasn't just like, oh, hard work got me through. It was also a lot of stumbling and a lot of people that believed in me and helped me along the way. And this journey is not always like uphill, and that's perfectly normal and expected because we're just human beings.
Getting yourself to be relatable makes it much more easy for these young women to actually see themselves in you, and I think that's really like great and fabulous. Talking about some of the difficulties you experience, kind of like getting into the STEM field of your choice. I read one of your blog posts where you talked about how difficult it was to apply to your engineering school because even the guidance counselors didn't know a lot about the specifics, like the subject tests. And even though all of these hurdles were against you, you still managed to apply to your dream school. But what, like, based on your experience, how were you able to surpass these obstacles and ultimately get to the engineering program of your choice?
I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I had all of these like big dreams. I wasn't really set up to fulfill any of them based on where I live. So like the demographics of where I was, financial situation. We were like super poor, and I just didn't have the resources. But because I was so annoyingly determined, believe me, I was very annoyingly determined, I was able to find an organization. And honestly, I cannot remember if I wrote this in the article or not, but this is how it happened. I was just walking by in my neighborhood and saw this organization that said called College Steps. And I was like, oh, I never noticed that. And I was like just reading, some of the papers on the window and the sign. And this woman inside, she opened the door and she was like, can I help you? And I was very like, no, that's okay. And she said, you look like a high school student. Just ask me questions. And in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, you seem approachable. You seem like you can help. And she was like, do you want to just come in and fill out an application? She's like, it's free of charge. This is for the community. This is the help. Like, it literally fell on my laps that I've been looking for, and I didn't even know. She's kind of interviewing me a little bit. Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to do? And I remember saying something. I want to go to Columbia and School of Engineering. And she was like, okay. And I can see in her face this shock of like, oh my God, this student from this community wants to attend one of the most prestigious universities that we have, but also being like, hey, it's going to be really difficult. So she outright was like, it's a very hard school, but let's try. Not like, oh, it's probably gonna, no, you're not gonna make it. This is the reality. None of that, which my guidance counselor had. They usually were very like, I don't think you should do that. That's just like a recipe for failure. She gave me the reality of it, like, yeah, it might be really hard and you might not get into it, but she's like, that's okay. I'm going to help you find other schools that are going to give you like a very similar experience and a very similar level of education so that we can have, she taught me about like your reach schools, your moderate schools, the ones that you're definitely going to get in. And to this day, I am so incredibly grateful for her. Because she believed in me in that manner, I was able to kind of continue, even when I stumbled, to be like, listen, somebody believes in me. Yeah. I can do this. And like, hey, maybe my dreams are a little bit far-fetched now, but it doesn't mean you can't try. Failure, it's okay if it happens, but you'll never know if you don't try.
And I think that you were really lucky to have that support. And I think I had a similar experience too, like someone that believes in you and lets you apply to your high dream school is helping you achieve that dream. But unfortunately, there is a lot of guidance counselors that kill those dreams and say, hey, you look like this, you come from this school, from this community, and that's not attainable for you. How about let's just do community college? You know what I mean? And that's so sad.
It's already so difficult to fight that, implicit bias that we have, the performance bias that we have. We have to always kind of psych ourselves out and be like, forget about all those things that people say about us and just do it. So we already have so much stacked against us. When a guidance counselor, somebody in authority, also puts this big barrier on you, like, yeah, I know, yeah, what you're thinking, yeah, it's true. You're not going to make it. Like, what does that do for someone?
I know, like, some of these experiences help us kind of, like, think about ways that maybe we could change that. How are some ways you think that schools could better support students of color going into STEM fields?
It's complicated because it depends what level of schooling we're talking about. If we're talking about high school, I think they need better guidance counselors for sure. Better, and not necessarily that I had bad guidance counselor. I think they definitely cared about the students. I just think they didn't have the resources. So what I mean by better guidance counselor is just better trained guidance counselors who have the knowledge of really applying to different universities. Like my guidance counselors were not trained in that at all. So they also were operating at a limited capacity. So they didn't really have the resources to be like, yeah, let's look at the data for the school and let's look at the applications. They pull it out. They didn't know. They didn't know what the requirements were. They just have these books and you would open it and you were like, okay, well, Buffalo, you need this, you need this, you need that. Okay. And it was just like very standardized approach to all the students. In terms of at least going to college, I do feel like they do need this knowledge and this training. But in college, from what I've read in terms of like what makes a school successful in like retaining and graduating STEM students, it's usually that they change the entire model of how they teach. Instead of this traditional curriculum that has been in existence for hundreds of years for teaching this, they actually give a lot of introductory courses so that students get a feel for it and get excited for it. Just like, hey, there's all of these options. Take them all. Just try it out. In terms of bringing in students from high school, what successful universities do is that instead of looking just academia, so like, okay, they took these SATs and they did really well. They took these subjects and they did really well. Therefore, they're going to do well in our engineering program. What they do is they look for students that have the desire to be there. So the level of excitement for this field is there because when you refocus what this like perfect candidate looks like, you open, the doors to a whole lot of really, really creative students that you might not have brought in just because of their grades. And that's honestly what STEM industry needs. They need a flush of creativity, of people that have like different points of view, different thought process, so that we don't like just keep like reinventing the wheel and we have somebody that's just like, hey, I'm an artist. I see things this way. I'm a writer. I do this different. I'm a poet, because it's all part of STEM, which is, I'm sure you've heard of STEAM now.
Mm.
So people are recognizing that art is definitely intertwined, but I don't think that it's been happening in academia. Like, I don't think that, they've made that big change to be like, yes, let's bring in more artistic people, more creative people into our programs. I am pretty sure that I was that candidate for them that was like, well, let's take a risk. Let's see. But I just, like I said, I just don't think that that's how they operate usually. Usually it's just like test scores and how many extracurricular activities have you done? And like, I'm sorry, but not every student has access to do coding programs in high school and robotics lessons in middle school. So just because they don't have that doesn't mean that they're not going to be excel at it.
Yeah.
They're still very young people with open minds, but we're looking at an application on paper. They kind of pick the kid that's already done a whole lot of STEM related stuff.
Another question, and more specifically, a woman of color. When you were applying to these engineering schools and even in your time in college, did you experience any type of pushback because you were a woman in this field?
Definitely, and from the people I least expected it. I honestly didn't know that engineering was a male-dominated field when I started this journey. Like, I was like, I just love it, and I think it's going to be something that's suitable for me based on like my abilities and the way that I thought. So I just kind of did regular research and was like, yeah, this is a perfect field for me. Whether men did it or not, I didn't know, because I didn't grow up with any people that were in the engineering discipline at all. So I had no idea that it was not common for women to be in it. But as I started applying to school and telling people, my teacher started being like, oh, it's so great that as a female student, you want to go into this field. And I was like, what does that mean? Immediately I started getting this message just like, yeah, because usually it's not for you. And they meant really well. Like, they were trying to be like, I'm so excited for you. But they didn't know that they were just planting stereotypes, they were just kind of putting it up. But I was telling my family about it. They started being very concerned that I was going to go into this field that was like for men. But it was, again, something that I was like, wait, what? How is it not appropriate? And they're just like, that's usually for men. Like, why do you want to do that? And I felt like, almost like, are you trying to sexualize this choice? Like, this is so strange.
True. Yeah.
Little by little, that started becoming like a big burden on me, whereas when I started school, I was already kind of expecting that I was going to be the only female student. But it wasn't the case at all. Then the pool of students becomes more of like what it might look like in the real world. And it wasn't until I would say junior or senior year that I was like, oh, it is a man's field. And so my professors were not very diverse at all anymore. Immediately, I was like, oh, I see where we're going. And, once I entered my first job, I was like, oh, damn, I was the only female in the department. So I really saw this like process, like how it plays out and how we barely make it out of college, let alone into jobs.
There's even hurdles in the workplace as a woman. And I was going to ask you also, like, once you did start working as an engineer, what were some of the challenges that you faced in your work environment that you found the most like difficult?
To be frank, the hurdles in the work environment are by far the toughest ones to overcome. I saw the lack of diversity right away. The lack of diversity, both in gender and race. I had this like idea that, and it's a wrong idea. I'm going to put that out there before I say it. But I had this idea that perhaps if I was the only one, it would be beneficial for me. Like, somehow, hey, she's the only one, I would not be overlooked. I did not expect that, even as the only woman and the only person of color in a department, that I would still be overlooked. Soon after, I started realizing that I was treated very much like a secretary, and that's not an offense, secretary. It's more just like I just didn't feel that they trusted me. Like, I was doing so much clerical work, and So I started believing that it was me, that I was just like not outspoken enough, that I was like maybe lazy. And eventually, like, I just really believed that. I was like, maybe I'm just a lazy person. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to just like go out there and get what I want. I wait for people to give it to me. And like all of these messages, as young professional women that you get are just like this very like lean in messages of like, oh, you, if you are not successful, if you're not getting the projects you want, if you're not getting the clients you want, if you're not making as much money as you should, it's because you are not doing enough to get those things. And I was like, oh my God, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? And I drove myself crazy just trying to make me better, make me a better employer. But the reality is that that environment was so detrimental to my mental health that I could not do it. But when I quit and I thought like, well, I quit and I'm probably never going to be an activist again, because who's going to want to hire me to speak to their students about it if I couldn't even follow through with my own advice? But it actually made me a better speaker in a way, because I was like, listen, I've been through the entire timeline of what it happens to us. It's not, I don't want to say that it's unavoidable, but I was like, it just means we got to fight harder. And now I tell young students sometimes when they're worried about entering the job force, I was like, you know what? You might work for an amazing company. It might be great. You might not notice things are growing for a year. Everybody's going to have a different experience. Mm-hmm. But from the beginning, I'm like, you got to notice these microaggressions. You have to notice them and you have to nip them in the butt as fast as you can. And if it's not working out, move on. So, I'm happy. I'm really happy where I am now. I do eventually want to continue. I mean, I'm always going to be doing STEM work forever and ever. I'm never going to not do it. It's my passion and I love the industry. But whether I go back to doing specific like engineering work like I was doing, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe not.
Yeah, because it didn't reflect how much potential you had. Like you had all the potential, you had all the knowledge, but it just, the people that were running this industry or the workforce that you worked in just didn't believe in you. And that's one of the ways that they could have supported you better, right? Was to give you mentoring that took into account your identity and how it fit into the workplace. Do you have like other ideas or suggestions for how workplaces can actually like support women in STEM fields?
Mentoring is a really, really good approach. But I almost hesitate to say it only because I've seen mentoring programs and they're really superficial, like I said. My company had a mentoring program and I kind of was like asking for mentors since forever, and they never really took it that serious. And when they did offer mentors, it was just not the type of mentoring that I desperately needed. Like I needed somebody to be like my hermana, like somebody that really gets me, but there was nobody like me. And I think it's so important for companies to be like, no, like that kind of like visibility is important for your young, hires. They need to be able to see there are more people like you in this company and successful in this company. I mean, there were other workers that I bonded with at a level, some of them engineers, but I almost had to like seek them out. And I mean, they were not like getting paid to be my mentor. So even though I really appreciated them and I saw them as role models, it wasn't like I could be like, hey, I'm having this problem. Let me go specifically to you because you're my mentor. They were, and maybe if I had done that, they would have been fine with it. But I just didn't feel like that was a fair thing to put on their shoulders. I mean, companies they need to just trust us. They need to trust us. You hired us. Did you hire us because you really believe that we can make your company better, or did you just hire us because it looks good on paper? Mm-hmm. They really got to ask themselves those questions. They got to pay up equally. There's still not a lot of fair pay in the industry, and nobody talks about how much money they make to each other. So everybody's always in the dark, and somebody could be making $50,000 more than the other person doing the same job, and nobody talks about it. It's not a considered polite conversation to have.
It's not the job of the employee to have to be doing all this inclusivity. That should be the employer's job. but they don't take it upon themselves.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk to you about your blog post, Why Making STEM Pink is Absurd. I thought it was really interesting. And one of the things that you wrote about was how growing up with strict gender norms prevented you from being able to see yourself as an engineer. But at one point, did you decide that you were not going to fit into these stereotypes and that you were still going to do your dream of being an engineer?
Yeah, I kind of always been a very, like, I mean, definitely been very feminist, but also, like, I kind of like it when what I want to do goes against the norms. It's always been the way I am. I like to push buttons. I mean, I was a pretty obedient, child growing up. It wasn't like I was, like, a rebellious kid.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of what like was expected of a lady, I rejected that wholeheartedly all the time. My mom was a single mom, and I was like, she's tough as hell, and I only grew up with sisters, so I never really had that like comparison with like a male brother or something like that was set this up for me, like, oh, this is what's appropriate for you. And now my mom definitely, I mean, part of it was like she was always working a lot. She also was a very trusting person, and she would tell us to our faces. She wasn't perfect by any means, but she definitely would say, like, I trust you guys, and you can talk to me about anything. And so in a way, I think she fostered a way that was like a very feminist and forward thinking and very like, whatever you want to do, just do it. And she definitely all the time, to this day, she still says that, like, she's like, I had all these dreams and I couldn't get them done. I couldn't do them. So I want my daughters to do it, whatever they want to do. So, if we wanted to be part of some program or whatever, she would try so hard to like get money so we can do it.
I think it's so inspiring to hear like about your growing up and having such an empowering upbringing, and your mom being so cool and like forward thinking. I think that's amazing, because sometimes moms can put the stereotypes in us. For example, in my life, like, my mom put stereotypes in us, and I think that's so sad, because even your moms are making you not believe in things because you're a woman. So I think that's very empowering that you had such a powerful female figure in your life. Didn't like push back against what you wanted to do. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful mothering and nurturing way to raise your kids. And that brings me to my final question. What would you say to a young girl who wants to pursue STEM fields, but that is unsure if she will be able to succeed or fit into these fields?
Why does she feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
So I think getting to the point, I think pinpointing exactly like what's the unease is important. Mm-hmm. I think pinpointing exactly like where is the discomfort for you. If not able to ask all of those details and go into all of that, I think I would just firmly suggest that they find some guidance, a mentor. It doesn't even have to be somebody that is in STEM, that knows and anything like that. Just somebody that like believes in them and is going to be like your cheerleader. I was like, find who that is. A younger sibling that's just like, hey, I believe in you, sis. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's happening. I'm not sure how to help you, but I really believe in you and I'm here for a hug. That kind of like emotional mentoring is so crucial for you to kind of keep your head clear, even when things get really, really difficult, right? Resources, you can find them. If you really like apply or something, you can find them. You can search. We have a very open internet now. There's libraries, there's programs. Even if you don't know that they exist, you can kind of like ask around and find them. But that emotional, cradling that some people can do for you, that's hard to find. And if you find that, stick with it forever. It's really important.
That's a good piece of advice.